So my name is Gaby Ruiz-Funes. I'm a senior product manager at Home Chef, and I've been with the company almost 4 years now, which is forever for a millennial. And I will give you guys a little bit of info on my background before we dive in, but I want to make sure everyone's here for the right thing. We're going to be talking about how your feminine brand and key feminine attributes are your superpower at work today. So before we get started, a couple of notes for some tech housekeeping. Usually I do this talk in person, so it's a new world to do this without seeing everyone's faces. I'm going to ask that if you have questions about the content, either clarification or you want to push back on something, which is absolutely encouraged, please use the link above, the Google Slides link that will show up in my notes. It's easier for me to see. And then there will be points in this workshop where I'll ask you to share some thoughts, and we'll use the chat in Hopin for that. And then finally, feel free to DM me during the talk or afterwards if you have more sensitive questions or just want to continue the conversation afterwards. And the last thing before we get started, the content is much more important than seeing my face today. So even though I'm really happy it's sweater weather, you can double click to maximize the video on your screen and you'll be able to see the slides a lot better. Thanks, Alexander. Awesome. All right, let's get going. So what we will cover today is what I call the business case for female attributes in the workplace. And as we go along, I will use a very specific definition of female attributes. I know there are a lot of amazing conversations about gender that are happening today that are nuanced. And for this talk, I'm talking specifically about characteristics that we socially associate with women or with femininity. So, whether that's right or wrong, scientific or biological, that's what I mean when I say feminine or femininity. It's not necessarily gender. It's more about soft skills that we typically associate with femininity. And so I'll be talking about why those characteristics are super valuable and actually undervalued today, and how we can elevate them individually and collectively so that we can all win. We'll talk about how those female characteristics are critical for diversity of thought, how they impact an organization positively, and how they make people stronger individual contributors, teams, and leaders. And then finally, and the most important part of this, will be embracing our own individuality, doing some reflection on what characteristics we want to elevate, what we might downplay, and what we're currently bringing to the work in terms of our personal brand. So this first part is really laying the foundation, and the second part we'll dig in. We'll do some virtual dialogue there. So a little bit more about me and how this talk came to be. I'm a product manager at Home Chef, as I mentioned. I was previously in operations technology at Home Chef and have moved into the digital innovation team. And I started my career in manufacturing. So I started in plastics manufacturing, very hardcore, some would say masculine environment. And I moved from that to advertising as a software engineer and then into product. So I've had a few interesting stages of my career, all of which have helped me understand bit by bit the value of my personal feminine characteristics. And I learned through those 3 stages of my career that the more I actually leaned into my inherent feminine attributes, even in male-dominated environments, the more I actually maximized my impact. And so that self-reflection is really what informed this workshop today. And what I guess like the thesis of today, what I would submit to all of you is, if you embrace your feminine characteristics as credible, you will impact your organization and be an icon for other women who are looking into tech fields. And I actually would go as far as to say this applies to people of all genders, because we all have, quote unquote, masculine and feminine characteristics that are expressed and suppressed at various times. And I would say the soft skills that we often think of as secondary or less important or even weak are actually critical to the success of teams and important for us all to kind of reflect on and elevate in our individual brands. So let's start with, what is femininity? I alluded to this a little bit earlier. The definition I'm going with is a set of attributes, behaviors, and roles generally associated with girls and women. It is absolutely socially constructed, but there are biological differences between men and women. Karen, I love your comment. Your journey supports your thesis. I really want you to share your experience as we go along in this talk. That's awesome. Yes, this is about embracing your natural skills and not trying to fit into any box that's defined by society. And we'll talk about how that can be challenging, especially when people have certain expectations of how we might behave as women or people who present as female. But what I want to hammer home today is those attributes are critical for us to elevate and celebrate when we see them portrayed by other people. So I'm going to start with a little interactive piece here. Instead of the kind of awkward, everybody raise your hand moment that we have in person, we're going to do a little free sharing. And actually, I'd love if all of you pull up a notepad or a note in your phone, jot down these strengths, because they'll come back later. And Karen, you kind of already started talking about this. What are some of your strengths or favorite characteristics about yourself? So feel free to share those in the chat. One of my personal favorite characteristics about me is that I love bringing people together, and that I, am sensitive to when people have something to share at work but don't necessarily feel like speaking up. So I would invite all of you in the chat, if you so choose, to share some of your favorite characteristics. It can be that you're brave. It can be that you're a free spirit. It can be that you're, authoritative. Anything that stands out at work or even in your personal life. I'll give you guys a few seconds. Just feel free to dump them in there. I know someone's brave enough to get started. Give you some more examples. Assertive, creative, awesome, empathetic, beautiful, resilient. That's an important one, especially for tomorrow's themes. Good one, Rebecca. Cool, brave, awesome. And there's no right answer here. This is a self-reflective moment. What are some things you love about yourself? Whether they're highlighted at work or not, it can be anything. Give you guys a couple seconds. Let's get 2 or 3 more. Grit, awesome. Oof, that's so good. All right. Feel free. Anyone who thinks of more, drop them in. Pushing others, that's a really good one. And actually, I want to pause there, because pushing others to take chances is actually a very interesting one, because typically people don't see women as risk takers. They see us as risk averse, but actually risk taking and aggressive qualities manifest in interesting ways for women typically. Now I'm saying these statements, obviously they're outliers. People present different qualities in different situations, but pushing others to take chances is an example of how women often are more aggressive negotiators and risk takers when it's on behalf of someone else. So that nurturing quality that we often think of as soft, mothering, is actually very pronounced when we talk about taking risks, especially when we want to push others to achieve their highest expression of themselves. So that's a really great one, Suzanne. I'm glad you dropped that in the chat. So that's an example of how feminine characteristics have these interesting hidden expressions. Yes, the mama bear, exactly. So that's the perfect example. I'm really glad. I didn't even plant that. I couldn't have planned it better myself that someone said that. So I hope everyone's done taken a couple minutes to just think internally about some characteristics that they appreciate about themselves. Let's look at how traditionally feminine characteristics, and even I would say as far as some aspects of female biology that we're starting to understand in science, and their impact on teams. And I've purposefully not outlined feminine characteristics that we associate with female yet. That will come later in the program, but I didn't want to plant the seed too early. We will talk about that soon. So how does being female actually impact an organization? We talk a lot about acceptance and feeling like the other as females in male-dominated fields, or maybe even, feeling like there's too much feminine energy. I've heard that phrase in friends where there are a lot of women that they work with. And I want to kind of cut through that and actually think about what more objective qualities actually impact organizations. And so two of my favorite studies I'll cite, one is about women's brains. So they did a study of 1,000 young women and men. Sorry, 1,000 adolescents. And this is in Psychology Today. So they wanted to understand what is the difference between genders. And one of the things they found was a concentration of gray matter in women's brains, more so than men, which tells us that women's brains may actually be optimized for combining analytical and intuitive thinking. I just think that is so cool. Right, exactly. Oh man, that's so great. Too much collaboration, which is not a bad thing. And we'll actually see some evidence for that later. That's a great comment. So what I love about this study is, our brain is ultimately a machine, right? I may be outing myself as an engineer a little bit. I am one by training. And our brains are optimized for combining analytical and intuitive thinking. So it's not that we're just analytical minded. It's not that we're just feeling our way through life. It's that we're actually optimizing and bringing these two mechanisms together. And that's really cool. And I think, the comment about too much listening to each other and collaboration, that's actually a really good thing to point out, because women have different communication styles, but the effect of that is combining various ideas and processing them into more of an analytical output using our intuition. It's complicated, but it's such an asset when you think of the complicated work that we all do as people in technical or tech adjacent fields. The second piece of how our biology or characteristics impacts the bottom line, the other big scientific nugget I want to drop here is an MIT study on high performing teams. So controlling for hundreds of variables in this study, researcher by the name of Martha Mangelsdorf, which is an awesome last name, actually found that the one factor that stood out is the number of women on teams of different sizes, ethnic backgrounds, genders. And what she submits in her MIT paper is that high-performing teams that have more women actually see collective intelligence rise in the presence of feminine attributes. So those exact attributes of listening to one another, collaborating, being empathetic and not sort of razzing each other, right? That actually raises the collective intelligence. And what the study found is that members have strong social skills and the conversation reflects more members' ideas, which is really cool. How many of you feel that, that's sort of the impact you have on your teams, is being able to listen, synthesize different opinions? think that's probably something, if I'd had to guess, yep, Yumna, you got it. Yeah, cool. And, that may be something typically we don't think is valuable. And we'll talk about this right now. We're not evaluated typically on those skills, right? They're not seen as hard skills. You don't have on LinkedIn, listening to people well. When in actuality, at work and in life, it's critical to collective success. So let's talk about this topic of how feminine attributes impact the work environment. We can tell qualitatively they have a higher impact on teams. We have these cool attributes of being able to combine our intuition and analytical thinking. So what impact does that actually have on an organization? Well, there was a wonderful study by CEB, which is sort of an organizational research group. And they outlined, yes, we do need to find a way to measure, yes. So what we're typically measured on and evaluated on are these general categories of our output, our utilization, on-time task completion, the quality of our work, how little we make errors, right? And, obviously there are other things we're evaluated by at work, but typically these buckets are very structured in how we're evaluated. It's not on our ability to identify when someone's at the table and they don't have an idea that's probably really good and we invite them to speak, right? Like that's never been on a review that I've had personally. And that makes sense if you think about the history of work, how we evaluate employees. But we're entering a different period of time where innovation, creativity, collaboration are essential to surviving and thriving in an environment, especially one like COVID. Now, how about these skills? And I'm calling them skills because they're not just qualities, they're not just coincidence. Do these look familiar to people? Do you guys feel like, improving processes, whether you act on it or just see it, see process improvements or improved ways of sharing information, organizing sanity out of chaos, herding cats is something we're good at, right? So these are all really important skills to bring to an organization. And often, and I think if we read through these carefully, we see some of those feminine characteristics or traditionally feminine or soft skill characteristics show up in these descriptions. And so what I would say in this case is, if this isn't on your review, start writing it in your review. If you feel like you found a better way to disseminate information, if you started a newsletter, for example, that should be in your review. Because if it's not coming from the top down, that's okay. It may not be acknowledged yet, but this is where I would invite you, in the spirit of empowering ourselves and others today, to actually start acting on this and highlighting this not only in formal reviews, but also acknowledging it when you see your peers, women or otherwise, acting in these manners. So what exactly does this have to do with femininity? I'm going to skip this because I think, well, we'll do this quickly. So how many of you think you're A and B? Measuring assists. Yeah, I mean, we do that in sports, don't we? Why shouldn't we do that in the workplace? So I think all of us are probably a combination of A and B, right? And that sort of goes back to this combination of intuitive and analytical thinking that we're predisposed to. Now, what's interesting is CEB actually found that, well, they didn't find, they coined this phrase enterprise contributor. And that person has a combination of the A and B skills. So how many of you feel that you're actually good at several of these skills in each column? People who have the ability to, create high quality work, but also improve work methods, who transfer ideas back to that listening to others, sharing ideas, making safe space for people to share ideas. That's actually a high value skill. And these traits are in short supply. So I'm not saying only women have these traits, but we have a superpower. We are naturally more predisposed in most cases to this enterprise contributor role in an organization. And that only makes up 23% of Fortune 500 employees. I'd venture to guess most people in this room here and at this conference today make up a good portion of that minority of employees who have the ability to implement new ideas, to synthesize and engage your colleagues to share, figure out ways to transfer skills, even if it's informally, or knowledge, who are great at onboarding, something that most of us have to do in our jobs, but aren't necessarily evaluated on us. We're in, a human resource role. And we all probably have pretty high standards for our work. I know my friend Lorena's in here. I know there are definitely some engineers here, and if you push an error out, the downside is pretty high. So I don't want to belabor the point too much, but the Corporate Leadership Council, CEB Corporate Leadership Council, found that there is a huge impact on the bottom line for organizations that increase the number of these enterprise players. So Fortune 500 companies that can generate more, that can encourage more of that behavior that we already are predisposed to, can have a major impact on the bottom line. And this is the number they found, when comparing all Fortune 500 companies and looking at the percentage of these enterprise contributors in the workforce. So transforming the entire workforce into enterprise contributors, and I would use the term people who exhibit feminine qualities, can generate an 11% change in year-over-year profit growth and 5% change over year-over-year revenue. So that's all fine financial analysis. The bottom line is we have these superpowers that I saw people write in the chat, and they have a dollar value that's pretty impressive tied to them. So whenever you're second guessing yourself at work, or you think, you've spent too long overanalyzing how to write an email, those are the feminine qualities, the sensitivity, the thoughtfulness, the intuitiveness, combining that with analytical skills that lead to numbers that are this big. And if I tried to say it out loud, I'm sure I'd butcher it. So the bottom line is this is a superpower that has real value associated with it. So I know we're coming up short on time a little bit, so I don't want to breeze through this, but I want to stress our feminine characteristics are equally credible to the masculine, quote unquote, masculine attributes that we typically think of as necessary for success in the workplace. And I want everyone today to see those attributes as credible to their value proposition at work, and to start highlighting them and measuring assists, and really emphasizing when you see other people exhibiting some of those skills that we typically downplay in an organization. It's in our collective best interest to elevate the importance of female traits. Now, quickly, how does this manifest in leadership positions? And now we're actually going to get into the traits aspect of this. So what makes us strong team members that we mentioned before, listening to others, synthesizing ideas, actually makes us really capable leaders. Those feminine traits actually predispose us to identify unspoken messages a little bit more. We're attuned to people's nonverbal communication, which I think everyone knows is pretty critical to read. And especially when you are a leader, people aren't always saying what they feel. And so we have this awesome superpower where we can kind of use that intuition and then make analytical decisions about our team and how to get the best out of them, how to push them to succeed, but also when to pump the brakes off and notice that, okay, we're pushing grind a little too much, or someone may have something going on outside of work. Our instinct is to build consensus, and that's positive. I think a lot of times people look to leaders to make definitive decisions, and that decisiveness is important. We have that capability, but leadership oftentimes is about consensus, and we have a predisposition to take in multiple viewpoints and then dole out praise where necessary. So let me pause here. When we talk about leadership traits, or even just traits that are celebrated in an organization, we typically kind of bucket them to masculine and feminine traits. But I'd like for you guys to take a second and just look at both of these columns and write down or post in the chat any traits that you feel you have, either all the time, some of the time, and they can be in any column. The point here is, you know, we're all a balance, right? We're all yin and yang, but we often tend in organizations to favor decisive, resilient, analytical, aggressive, you know, those kind of more masculine traits, when in reality, some of those traits we associate as feminine or softer or weaker are really essential to moving an organization forward. So if anyone has qualities they identify with most, now's the time, post them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll move on. Feel free. So what I think is interesting is the Harvard Business Review found in a poll of people all over the world in leadership positions that those more feminine attributes, ethics and safety, efficient learning, nurtures growth, again, pushing others to be their best, connection, belonging, those are the most essential characteristics to strong leaders. And yet, those are not characteristics that we're typically evaluated on in our reviews or that are overtly celebrated in organizations. But they're so important, especially now when we're in a world of complexity and leaders have to listen and be humble and empathetic. It's critical. And I can't drive this home enough. You know, this isn't saying masculine qualities are bad and not useful and typically masculine, right? But I actually know a lot of leaders who I look up to, especially even at Home Chef, who I would say actually their dominant leadership style is the column on the left. They're expressive, they're reasonable, they listen, they're patient, they praise intuition. So I know we're short on time, but I wanted to challenge you all. Yeah, self-organizing for sure. I want to challenge you all to reframe a bit, reframe the viewpoint on some of these characteristics. And it's something, you know, we have to actively work out. This is deeply ingrained bias, and start looking at these qualities as your superpower. How often do you feel like you might have to downplay aspects of your femininity? It's really common among individuals, especially when you're one of few women in a work environment. We often feel like we're forced to kind of be more masculine. When I first started working in manufacturing, I would memorize football stats the night before I'd go to work on Monday. I don't know how football works. I love soccer. I don't understand football, but I always felt like I had to study the game so I could have something valuable to say. And what I realized is when I actually leaned into my femininity, when I'd ask people about their kids, when I wore bright yellow shoes on the manufacturing floor, don't worry, they were safe. I actually was more authentic, more at ease, and I developed long-lasting, effective relationships with my colleagues. And it is easier to do together. So part of this is acknowledging what makes us great, but also celebrating actively these qualities in our colleagues and friends. So this is sort of a introspective question, but does anyone have an example of when you downplayed femininities at work? Feminine qualities of femininities? Yeah, wardrobe. That's a big one. That's a big one. I had that same issue where I sort of downplayed, wore a lot more grays, but I actually ended up wearing jeans with like a little rip in the knee to work one day, and a colleague confided in me that it gave her the courage to wear jeans to work. So we're doing this processing in the background. We're constantly expressing and downplaying our qualities, but I would submit, you know, wardrobe is an important aspect of your brand, and it's not something that should be downplayed. It might sound superficial in the context of this, but it's actually really important because it's a symbol of what else we're downplaying, right? It's our armor. Voice changing. Oh, these are great examples. I actually, this is an aside, but I read somewhere that women feel more confident when they're at eye level with people. So now whenever I'm in a conference room, I always try to make sure to get the chair that's up the highest. I'm also 5 foot, so it helps in general, but there are all sorts of hacks that we're constantly doing to fit in, to downplay. And I would say, let's start taking those hacks and using them to sort of elevate a little bit. Yeah, you are what you wear, be bold. And that's kind of the last point I want to make here, is what is a brand? A brand is a way somebody perceives you, how they experience you. And the wardrobe is the first impression oftentimes. Maybe it's your email, but it is how people perceive you. And there's a trade-off, right? Like, Benicia, you may have experienced this when you downplayed your girliness or your femininity in your wardrobe. Maybe people treated you more seriously. But I would argue that, you know, there's strength in numbers. And if you want to dress a little bit more feminine because you feel more comfortable and you feel like you can lean into that superpower, then do it and others will follow. As Karen said, I think it's a lot easier to do it together. Yeah, I've given this talk at an engineering conference, and a group of women who worked at BP actually said they colluded, they decided they were going to wear dresses to work. And I think that's awesome. And that's you know, everybody has different ways of dressing. Some people don't express feminine qualities through more feminine dress. And it's really about what that authentic brand is that you bring to the table that elevates those feminine qualities that I mentioned earlier. So I want everyone to take a screenshot. Normally this would be, you know, an open dialogue, but screenshot this, spend some time thinking about it. Maybe, you know, do some journaling or write them down, or next time you have a review or you know, a 360 for a colleague, look at these and remind yourself, okay, what feminine qualities am I sort of treating as secondary, or maybe you don't, and maybe you're that champion in the organization that's going to bring everybody along with you. And the last bullet is important. I think it's critical to say that women can do the work to elevate feminine characteristics. There are plenty of allies out there as well, but it's never okay to be in a culture that doesn't allow you to be comfortable and authentic. And if you ever feel like, you know, you are truly unsafe at work, I think I'm not advocating for people staying in a place that, you know, that doesn't make them feel their best. And obviously that's a luxury sometimes, but I do think it's important not to settle. Because as we saw with that giant number, we are valuable assets to any organization. So I challenge you all, and I'm continually challenging myself, and any home chef folks in here, Christina, you're great. I challenge you all to consciously make those female attributes part of your professional brand. It's hard, it takes conscious effort, and you know, we're all in this together, so elevate others as well. You can highlight the impact of some of those qualities in your review, invite others to speak at your next meeting, seek out the opinions of others, and lean into some of your natural communication strengths, whether it's in person, whether it's identifying nonverbal communication in others. And I know we're wrapping up, but think about this as you go on throughout the rest of your day. How will you make that feminine style? And I don't only mean clothes, but that your qualities top to bottom part of your personal brand. So for those of you who have stuck around, thank you so much. Go get them. Just by showing up, you're challenging the status quo, and everybody should feel empowered to elevate the characteristics that, maybe before they didn't see as so special. So empower yourself, empower others, and go get them. I will end with that. Thanks, everybody. And for those of you who want to keep in touch after this, I'm not really on social media these days, but my email is there, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your awesome chats and contribution today. This was great, and I think everybody here has something awesome to bring to the table. So you can do it.